Ladies and gentlemen, this is TVP World. From the front lines to the backstage, we bring you the latest from Ukraine this week. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee. This week's NATO Summit in The Hague saw Ukraine slip down the list of priorities, with President Zelensky taking a backseat while President Trump dominated the stage. Despite ongoing discussions, no concrete promises were made about Ukraine's NATO membership or a ceasefire. Meanwhile, on the ground, Russia's brutal attacks have intensified, with recent missile strikes in Kyiv, Dnipro, and other cities killing dozens of civilians as the summer offensive makes gains in eastern Ukraine. But before inviting our guest today, let's take a look at this report covering the latest news from Ukraine over the past week.
A summit, a strike, and a survivor's voice. This week, Russian attacks on Ukraine's civilians brought horror, but also hope for a push towards political resolutions. In The Hague, NATO leaders gathered for a high-stakes summit shaped by pressure from Washington and war on the EU doorstep. US President Donald Trump meetings Ukraine's President Zelensky on the sidelines of the summit left the door open to sending more Patriot missiles and military aid to the war-torn country. Zelensky called the 15-minute discussion substantive. Trump described Ukraine's war as more difficult than others, but gave no timeline for specific decisions. A day earlier, Zelensky stood in London with Britain's Prime Minister Keir Starmer, announcing their first joint UK-Ukraine arms production deal.
And I'm really proud that this afternoon we're able to announce an industrial military co-production agreement, the first of its kind so far as Ukraine and the UK are concerned, which will be a massive step forward now in the contribution that we can continue to make, and is really a symbol of not only our joint work in this conflict, but the 100-year agreement that we've put in place.
Later, Zelensky met with King Charles at Windsor Castle. Meanwhile, in Washington, the US nominee for top general in Europe told Congress he believes Ukraine can still win the war.
I think Ukraine can win. I think anytime your own homeland is threatened, you fight with a tenacity that's difficult for us to conceive of if we haven't found ourselves in that same situation.
Even as Ukraine's allies pledged support, Russian missiles rained down. On June 24th, Dnipro suffered one of the worst attacks this year. At least 21 people were killed and over 300 injured. A missile tore through apartment blocks and damaged a passenger train. President Zelensky, addressing Dutch lawmakers this week, called the barrage in Dnipro a part of Russia's systematic assault on civilians.
One way or another, life itself is the main target of these attacks, each one showing the true nature of Putin's war.
Just a day earlier, Kyiv was again under fire. 5 were killed, a metro station turned shelter was damaged, and fires erupted across the capital. Elsewhere, Russian missiles killed 2 in Odessa and 3 in Sumy. An 8-year-old boy was among the dead. In Kherson, Kramatorsk and Zaporizhia, strikes destroyed homes, hit fuel depots and injured dozens. In central Kyiv, less than a kilometer from the US embassy, a missile tore through a residential building. Valery Mankuta, a 33-year-old construction worker, was asleep when the blast hit.
I was thinking only about one thing: was I alive or dead? When I realized that I was alive, I didn't understand where I was and how I got there. And then I realized that this was an aerial attack and that I had to somehow get out of there. Well, it collapsed on me. I was under all this, under the plaster, under those bricks.
This week also brought another sign of progress. Ukraine welcomed home a new group of released prisoners of war, soldiers of the armed forces, National Guard and the Border Guard. The exchange was part of the Istanbul Agreement and focused on the severely wounded and young conscripts under 25. It marked the 7th swap in recent weeks. From the halls of NATO to the rubble of Dnipro and Kyiv, this week once again showed how diplomacy and destruction move in parallel, and why, for Ukraine, behind every headline is a fight for survival. The NATO Summit in The Hague wrapped up with a landmark agreement, a pledge to boost defense spending to 5% of GDP by 2035. But for Ukraine, the summit's tone felt less upbeat. There was no NATO-Ukraine Council this year, a first after 3 consecutive summits, including that format.
We didn't have a NATO-Ukraine Council meeting as we have had every year in the previous at the previous 3 summits after Russia's full-fledged invasion of Ukraine. So from that point of view, of course, there is an element of disappointment for Ukraine.
The optics may have shifted, but support hasn't vanished. NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte announced an expanded financial commitment.
Our European and Canadian allies have stepped up and have already pledged, where we originally would be able to announce a 20 billion over the first 3 months of this year. It is now, they will provide over 35 billion euros of additional security assistance to Ukraine for the year ahead.
That aid, in fact, ties directly into NATO's new 5% pledge. According to officials, any military assistance provided to Ukraine, be it weapons, training or logistics, will count towards a country's 5% defense spending. A win-win on paper, but for Kyiv this felt less like the spotlight and more like the sidelines. Zelensky also got his meeting with Donald Trump. While no firm promises came from the US president, the conversation marked a shift in tone. Trump acknowledged Russia's responsibility for their aggression, even if only indirectly.
It will take strong political and legal cooperation to make sure every Russian war criminal faces justice, including Putin.
And Ukrainian diplomats were quick to note a key takeaway. Even without headline breakthroughs, Ukraine remains a central part of NATO's long game, though perhaps not always the headline act.
I believe President Trump now understands that it is Russia that does not want to end the war, that Ukraine has unconditionally agreed to a ceasefire, and it's Russia that continues to stall. In my remarks, I emphasized that this shows a lack of respect from Vladimir Putin toward President Trump's peace initiatives.
Still, the absence of symbolic gestures, no new steps towards membership, no NATO-Ukraine Council, didn't go unnoticed. Analysts see these omissions as a sign of a summit more focused on internal cohesion than bold declarations.
You can look at the summit and look at negative things, but you can also look at positive things. So, for example, a lot of reports have said that President Trump was ambiguous on Russia, but when he was asked during the press conference, does Russia have territorial ambitions, he said that it's possible. So I think that this is just going to be a continuation, and we'll see what happens at the summit next year in Turkey. But it's going to be a long year in between for Ukraine and for allies as well.
For Ukraine, the message is clear. Its allies are rearming and still investing billions in its defense, but the political limelight is starting to shift. Whether that's a pause or a pivot will depend on what comes next.
And now here to unpack some of these stories and more, joining us is Krzysztof Jaworski, Director of International Affairs from the Institute for Security and International Development. Welcome, sir.
Hello.
So today we are taking a closer look at the aftermath of the most recent NATO summit. Of course, a lot of the world is focused on that 5% GDP spending, but I'm more curious about what that means for Ukraine. Do you think that there's still... what's your key takeaway, actually, from this meeting?
Well, the key take from the Hague Summit when it comes to Ukraine for me is the quiet victory of Ukraine. I think that the expectations when it comes to the outcome and the trajectory of war used to be too high in the recent years. It was impossible to gain fast and easy win. And what is really important in this summit, in Hague Summit, is that support for Ukraine is going to be continued, even if there were some skepticism from Trump, from Orban. The good thing is that aid for Ukraine is institutionalized and it will be included in calculation of a % of GDP spent when it comes to goal of NATO's defense spending. And important thing is that some additional support for Ukraine was already declared, even if we can observe that the burden shifted from US toward European Union, toward European members of NATO.
All right, so going back to what I originally wanted to ask you before digging your brains on this topic, is that whether or not you think Ukraine is still on the center of this topic when it comes to this iteration of the NATO summit, as a lot of people have been talking about perhaps Zelensky's focus is taking a back seat compared to the last iteration.
On the one hand, there are some indicators that Ukraine is a central topic for NATO. However, at the same time, it is sure that Ukraine is no longer, or if it never was, central topic for United States. And it is more important that NATO itself, because US is 70% of military capability and military spending of whole NATO. So President Trump declared a long time ago that he requires European NATO members to take a bigger part of this defense spending burden and to care of European security themselves, because he considers the current state of affairs unfair for United States, because United States both pay for it and have involvement when it comes to boots on the ground. So for President of the United States, this cannot go any longer. And he, by really bold statements and, showing that he can act according to his statements, made European leaders change their views and made them declare the new spending goal. And what does it mean for Ukraine? It means for Ukraine that this support from NATO will come more and more from Europe. And the question is whether these declarations will be then followed by specific actions, because there will be, and there already is, ongoing process of exhaustion when it comes to societies in Europe and when it comes to political support for such policy and for parties which are supporting Ukraine.
Right now, you mentioned something very important earlier, that this 5% GDP, military support to Ukraine can count towards that 5% GDP. So, one of the earlier worry about this 5% pledge is that maybe in trying to bolster every country's individual defense, the Ukraine support might take a backseat. But do you think that if this 5% also includes military aid to Ukraine, that will be less of an issue?
Yes, it will be less an issue. However, when we look at this numerical goal when it comes to defense spending, it is something which, all countries are making some calculations which are more in favor of them. So it includes things like, for example, military expense and not only this hard parts of military spending, like vehicles, like defense systems, and so on. So I think it's good that it will be broader when it comes to definition, but I would not like to base on it too much of a prediction, because this is for now only declaration. This 2% GDP goal was established a few years ago, and some countries didn't yet get it. So I think this 5% goal is important itself, because at least when it comes to narratives, to declaration, there is no longer this opposition when it comes to, recognizing the Russian threat for NATO, for Europe, recognizing the need for increasing military spending. However, even if it's narrative, declarative win, we need to, as Poland, keep pressure on our allies when it comes to now making these moves and making this goal real. And it's good that support for Ukraine is included in it, because these are connected issues, because the more we exhaust Russia in Ukraine, the more we, finally, I hope, stop Russia in Ukraine, it will make us, as NATO, as each NATO country, safer.
Now, of course, one of the highlights of this summit is also the meeting between Trump and Zelensky. The two seems quite cordial, and well, it seemed to have gone quite well. But of course, there's still a lot of details that we need to iron out. How do you think it went, and do you think that anything constructive might come out of it?
I think that it is good thing that this meeting was peaceful, that it was considered constructive by both sides. And I think that as we discussed, just discussed, this burden of support for Ukraine will shift from US. US will be no longer leading when it comes to this military support. They will try to make as much as possible of their burdens shift toward European NATO countries. So, of course, it is really significant that US is now feeling that their postulates, that their propositions are recognized by Europe, because it backfired at Ukraine, this tension between Europe and US. And while US will probably keep providing this capabilities which are unique for US, they will keep being gap filler. I think that when it comes to military vehicles, to other things that Europe has, Ukraine should focus on dialogue, on diplomacy, on requests toward European countries.
Right, and after the meeting, we also saw a press conference, and one of the things that really caught my eye was this journalist from BBC, which was from Ukraine, and she was asking about the Patriot air defense system. It does seem like Trump has softened his stance when it comes to supplying arms to Ukraine as well, and of course, in a very non-specific term, he did mention trying to find a way in order to provide these air defense systems to Ukraine. Do you think that could be a possibility going forward?
Well, I would not say that it's impossible. However, we need to have in mind that air defense systems, air defense missiles such as Patriot systems are scarce even in US and now Middle East and Israel, while for now there are we are after this first phase of hot conflict. We don't know where it will go next. It will take more and more resources from US, especially when it comes to air defense. And at the same time, the core priority for US is Taiwan. It remains Taiwan and rivalry with China. So when it comes to this operational theater, US needs as much military resources as it is possible to balance Chinese military. So in this optics, Ukraine is secondary for US, and that's why there will be strong and there are strong voices in Department of Defense, for example, stating that US should not move more of their crucial systems to Ukraine, because it's not a priority for their national interests.
And the other thing that caught my eye about this particular back and forth between the reporter and Trump is actually his response and talking about her personal story in a way that we see the more empathetic side of U.S. president. And do you think that having actually engaged with European partners, engaged with the Ukrainians, his stance towards Ukraine have changed slightly compared to before going into all these discussions?
I suppose that this first phase of new term of President Trump and these tensions when it comes to Ukraine, these tensions when it comes to Europe, led to particular effect, and Trump could consider that some of his goals were achieved. These are moving burden of military spending more toward European countries. These are making this new way of contact with Ukraine after this initial tensions. So I think that now it may be for now the end of this hot tensions and more constructive cooperation. However, from the perspective of Ukraine, in my opinion, there will be this plan maximum, which used to be when it comes to support from US during Biden presidency. So these good times are gone, and Ukraine, will not achieve now something which will help them to, not even win, but to have a much better position. It will be I think it will be next hard months for Ukraine, because this level of support will be not as high as in this initial phase of war.
All right, so we'll have to see how that develops. In the meantime, I'm also curious about the situation in Belarus as well, because we do know that Russia, Belarus will be conducting more military drills in September. Should we expect any provocations or confrontations among the EU border during these exercises, or perhaps even an opening of another front?
I would not say that it is highly probable there's opening of another front, because Russia is significantly engaged in Ukraine, exhausted, even if Russian military is sustaining its power or even building some additional capabilities. This front in Ukraine is something which is taking a lot of their attention, and even if in Ukraine they are unable to decisively win or make a decisive breakthrough when it comes to a military front. So I think it will be counter-effective from their perspective to make something like another land operation, and we have to have in mind at the same time what we've seen recently in Middle East, where Israel show how it is important to have air domination. And when it comes to NATO doctrine, we have this doctrine of air domination, and if we compare what Russia is doing with its aircraft in Ukraine, there are significantly weaker in this matter. So I think it is of really low probability. However, when it comes to provocations, it could be, and we should be extremely cautious when it comes to this, because for them, this particularly slow actions when it comes to its effect on the ground could be significantly used when it comes to narratives, to disinformation, to spreading the fear among our societies. So we should be really careful.
Another thing I want to touch on is on military production. According to Ukraine's defense minister, there's 21 initiatives now to localize production in Ukraine with the world's largest arm manufacturers, and up to 10 projects abroad as well. Is there any joint production plans with Poland, Ukraine, or what are most of the country that is thinking of having this cooperation?
So we are seeing now that there aren't significant new announcements when it comes to military cooperation, to defense industries cooperation between Poland and Ukraine. There are some contacts, there are some smaller projects. When it comes to selling equipment to Ukraine, several Polish companies has this experience, and they are gaining significantly when it comes to making their products and making their equipment much better, because they base it on this laboratory of full-scale war in Ukraine. However, as for now, we are not having anything which is breakthrough in this matter. But I hope that this dialogue and this contacts with Ukraine will finally lead to such stronger and bigger mutual cooperation projects, because defense industry of Ukraine is it's really innovative. It works under extreme pressure in real war in real war situation, and even if that's the matter, they are producing a lot of equipment, and they are producing really good equipment, especially when it comes to drones.
And now Poland is actually one of the first country to respond to Russia's aggression against Ukraine. I'm curious about what's the level of cooperation now. We've seen some recent polls that actually show some fatigue when it comes to that particular sentiment. But do you think that mostly has to do with how long the war has dragged on, or do you think there's any other factors going into this diminishing of support?
Well, you mentioned that Poland was first to respond after the Russian attack, and that's of course true. However, I am afraid that if we look at the current situation, what matters and what decides is how much support now we are sending to Ukraine. And if we look at the numbers, we are not, well, the biggest donor when it comes to money, and I am afraid that we should be realists on that matter. However, we should make our game and try to achieve as much as possible in this cooperation. And if you could remind me the final question.
Yeah, because general sentiment, it does seem to be dwindling when it comes to recent polling numbers. We show that Polish population supporting of the Ukrainian cause has been going down. I'm wondering if it just has to do with the general fatigue, or are there any more elements going into this?
Well, I suppose that the main trend is this fatigue, this exhaustion, even if someone could criticize this because at least we are not at war, and someone could say, how could we be exhausted if that's Ukrainians who are at war? However, that's how people attention, narratives, and even media works. So generally, when it comes to this part of attention we are focusing at Ukraine, it's of course lower than it used to be. And if we look at these expectations, which were really high, and I mentioned it at the beginning, for many people, after several years of saying that Ukraine is going to win soon, that Russia is so weak, or in the opposite, that Russia is so strong and Ukraine is losing, there were a lot of such exaggerations in both sides. I think that some people are now, well, thinking that all of this was not true. The truth is that Russia is going to fight a lot longer with Ukraine. However, if they cannot win there, they are not the problem for us. And if they are not the problem for us, why should we care? I suppose that the part of this picture and the part of this many causes of such a shift when it comes to public opinion in this matter.
Right. So when it comes to the question, why should we care? A lot of experts have been saying that Ukraine serves as a buffer, a shield, if you will, to defend the rest of Europe. Do you think that these Baltic countries and Poland will be ready if, in case Russia rolls over Ukraine and if there's any sort of invasion?
I think that it's a process, and we are making our capabilities better. We are building and buying equipment. We are introducing new procedures. We are gaining experience based off the support and this information from Ukraine. So it's like one trend, and the another trend is what's going on in Russian army, and they are of course having significant casualties. They are losing a lot of equipment, they are losing people, but at the same time they are gaining experience. They are one of the two most experienced armies in the world when it comes to full-scale land war now. And hopefully their level of their casualties and exhaustion will be bigger and big enough to make them calculate that they are unable to attack any other country. And when it comes to our preparations, I think that even if we see that Russia is not doing so good in Ukraine, we should not stop our preparations, because, well, that's what we can do on our part, and we should do our best in this matter.
Now, Russia is still working on militarizing school children as well. Do you think that if this drags on, the disproportionality of the kind of soldier on both sides is going to widen?
Well, it's not a... Yes, they have a bigger population, they have a bigger base for military draft, and they didn't use yet so much of this pool to make them unable to recreate their armies. However, at the same time, it's not that simple mathematics, because military systems, this advanced technologies, and the whole structure of operating of command and control in both armies makes a difference as well. And as for now, we can see that Ukraine is a little bit more effective when it comes to this military confrontation, because even if they have lower potential when it comes to demographics, to territory, and so on, they are able to stop Russia. And, well, of course, someone can say that Russia gained some territories, but we have to keep in mind that they lost some territories which they controlled after attack at the beginning of the war. However, if we look at this 3 years and this casualties and costs on Russian side, I think that it's unable for them already to achieve this maximum plan they had at the beginning. It's making NATO move its military installations back to the borders before accession of Poland and other Central and Eastern European countries to NATO. And now I think Russia has not potential to achieve this maximum plan.
All right, so circle back to the beginning of our talk, just a really quick rounding up. Rutte has stated that Ukraine's path to NATO is, quote, irreversible. What's your view on Ukraine's path to membership?
Of course, we should consider such statement by Mark Rutte as something which is much more declaration of the will of NATO countries, that something we should consider as, well, fact or some prediction, because it's a political statement, and it's, in my opinion, very good that NATO is keeping on this way of politically signaling that finally Ukraine has the right to access to NATO, and Ukraine finally, in the long term, will be part of NATO, because this stopping Ukraine accession to NATO and making it, even in the long term, impossible for NATO to move its borders, to move western borders more to the east, is one of the main goals of Russia. So it's really good that even if they are trying, and they are trying with brute military force to change this course, we are not giving up on this goal.
All right, thank you so much for your input and insight. Really appreciate it, and thanks for being with us on Ukraine This Week.
Thank you very much.
Cheers. And with that, we conclude this edition of Ukraine This Week. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.